In the first frozen hour before dawn, Evelyn Hart listened to the world go white. Snow pressed against the window in slow, cold sheets, every tree a dark silhouette stitched against a pale sky. Her cabin sat where the pines thinned into scrub, a squat wooden thing that had outlasted 2 husbands' winters and a town's forgetfulness. At 68, she moved as someone who had learned to carry grief like a second coat, wrapped, practical, heavy with use. The stove breathed. The iron kettle sighed. A single lamplight pooled on the pine floor, cutting a circle through dust and the day's old footprints. Photographs in a warped frame leaned above the hearth. A boy with a gap-toothed grin, a man in a denim jacket. Evelyn touched the glass without thinking, the press of memory making her fingers go numb for reasons that weren't the cold. She kept small rituals now, scattering crumbs for the jays, setting a saucer of milk by the shed, leaving a corner of the porch light on through storm nights. People in town called her the widow on the ridge, with the kind of pity meant to be kind and instead felt like distance. The loss was a thin map folded into every room, her husband's boots by the back door, her son's scarf in the cedar chest. She never spoke of the river that took them. She didn't have to. The house remembered for her. Tonight the wind had a knock in it. Something long and patient moved behind the pines. Evelyn lifted her chin as if listening for a name. She could not have known in that ordinary, habitual way how close the knock would come, or that answering it would change everything she had learned to hold. The snow deepened overnight, falling in waves so thick Evelyn could barely make out the tree line. The storm had a voice, low and steady, but beneath it came a rhythm she couldn't place. At first she thought it was just the cabin settling, beams shifting under the weight of ice. Then came a sound too deliberate for timber or wind. A double tap, hollow and distant like knuckles rapping against bark. She froze at the kitchen table, bread knife suspended over a hard crust. Outside, the jays had gone silent. That more than anything unsettled her. In winter, the birds never stopped scolding, not even when foxes prowled. She opened the door and leaned into the cold, her shawl tugged by the wind. The world felt emptied, as though every small creature had withdrawn, leaving her alone with something larger. Tracks marked the snow near the shed. At first glance, they seemed like a bear's, broad and pressed deep. Yet they didn't fit the rhythm of a bear's gait. They moved upright, step over step, too balanced, too human. She bent low, breath fogging the air. Each print spread wider than her handspan, toes splayed in a way that stirred something half-remembered from childhood tales. She shivered, though the cold had nothing to do with it. By the back porch, 2 handprints bloomed against the frost glass window, not smears from a neighbor's prank or a wandering hunter's glove, but the bare outline of fingers, long and thin. Evelyn touched the glass from the inside, her palm smaller by half. The prints had already begun to melt into the warmth of her cabin. She should have bolted the door then, drawn curtains, stoked the stove higher. Yet something deeper than fear kept her still. There was a pull in it, an odd ache that reminded her of the nights she waited for her son to return home late, long after curfew, that anxious tether between dread and hope. It wasn't danger she sensed, but desperation. All afternoon, the silence of the forest pressed against her. No coyote yipped, no squirrel chattered from the branches. Even the wind seemed to hush between gusts, as if listening alongside her. Toward dusk, she gathered wood from the porch, and there beneath the steps she noticed a shape small and trembling. 2 eyes, wide and wet, reflected back at her. They blinked once, twice, before retreating into shadow. Evelyn's heart hammered. Whatever hid beneath her porch was no fox. She crouched, her knees crackling, shawl brushing the snow. The faintest whimper reached her ears, high, thin, almost like a child's cry swallowed by the storm. She whispered without meaning to, the way mothers do when soothing infants, though no words formed. The sound came again, and this time there were 2 voices, soft and quivering, pressing close together in the dark. The storm raged, shaking the cabin's tin roof, but Evelyn hardly heard it. A choice pressed itself upon her chest. Retreat, close the door, pretend the prints and cries belonged to some trick of the weather, or lean into the mystery that had come knocking. She didn't yet know the price of mercy, only that the silence of the woods had carried 2 small lives to her door, and that her house, once so empty, was about to change. Evelyn lit the lantern and crouched again by the porch, her joints stiff with the cold. The flame wavered, throwing an amber glow into the narrow space beneath the steps. What she saw tightened her chest until she could hardly breathe. Two small figures huddled together, fur matted with snow, their limbs trembling from exhaustion. They were no children of man, though their eyes, dark, glistening, searching, echoed something painfully familiar. Their faces were broad, softened by tufts of downy hair, and their hands, too large for their tiny bodies, clutched each other as if letting go would mean death. The storm howled, but around the cabin the air seemed to still. The pines no longer thrashed. They bent forward as if listening. The lantern's light flickered across frost and branch, every shadow stretching longer like a congregation leaning close. Evelyn sensed with a sudden clarity that the forest itself had drawn breath, holding it for what came next. She whispered, her voice low, cracked but gentle. "It's all right, come now. You're safe here." She extended her hand, palm open. The larger of the two, the elder sibling, she guessed, tugged the smaller closer, baring tiny teeth in a warning gesture. Yet the sound that escaped was not a growl but a hoarse whine, weak with hunger and cold. Evelyn's heart twisted. That sound was not foreign. It was the same frail cry she had once heard from her son when fever gripped him as a boy. Against reason. Against every story the townsfolk muttered about beasts in the hills. She leaned farther, setting the lantern aside. Slowly, carefully, she spread her shawl across the snow, a patch of warmth and invitation. "Just here," she murmured. "Come out of the wind." The smaller one shifted first. Its fingers, 5 delicate long, crept onto the fabric. Snow melted against the wool. The elder followed, unwilling to release its hold. Inch by inch they emerged, legs bent, torsos hunched, hair clumped with ice, breaths fogging in frantic bursts. When both finally collapsed onto the shawl, Evelyn realized how tiny they were. No taller than toddlers, though their frames were thick with muscle beneath the fur. Infants, yes, but infants of a lineage that towered over men. The forest exhaled. Somewhere high in the branches an owl hooted once, soft, acknowledging. The silence that followed was not empty but reverent, as though every living thing had stepped back, allowing this fragile exchange to pass unbroken. Evelyn gathered the shawl's corners and lifted them into her arms. The weight startled her, heavier than they looked, solid as stone yet trembling as fiercely as any abandoned child. One pressed its face against her shoulder, the other clung to her wrist with startling strength. She gasped, but not from fear. A warmth spread through her chest, something she had not felt in years. The ache and relief of being needed. She carried them inside, past the door she had left ajar. The stove's glow spilled across their faces, and for the first time they blinked without fear. Their eyes, reflecting the firelight, were impossibly deep, old as river rock, yet innocent as dawn. Evelyn thought she saw herself in them. The same loneliness, the same hunger for shelter, for touch. The cabin, long emptied of laughter, filled again with the fragile sound of breathing that was not her own. Evelyn set them near the hearth, wrapped blankets around their quaking bodies, and stirred the fire higher. She did not ask what they were. She knew already, in a place beyond words, and though fear tugged at her, something greater took its place. Connection. A thread spun not by blood but by mercy, binding her to the wild and whatever watched from the trees. The storm did not relent through the night. Snow piled against the door, sealing Evelyn in with her unlikely guests. She dozed fitfully in her chair by the stove, waking at every creak of timber, every gust of wind that rattled the shutters. Each time she stirred, her eyes went first to the bundle of blankets on the rug. The infant slept in tangled limbs, their breathing shallow, but steadier now, warmth finally seeping into their bones. Once one whimpered and reached blindly for her hand. She gave it without hesitation, letting the tiny fingers wrap around her wrist until the tremor eased. A strange peace settled over her, fragile and unfamiliar, as though the cabin itself had agreed to guard its new charges. But peace never holds long in the wilderness. Near dawn, a sound pierced the storm, the high mechanical growl of engines. Evelyn stiffened, heart lodging in her throat. Hunters. No one else braved these ridges in winter, not unless driven by desperation or bloodlust. She moved to the window, pushing back the curtain just enough to see. Headlights bobbed through the trees, muted by snowfall. 2 snowmobiles, maybe 3, weaving between pines with the confidence of men who knew the land. She recognized the lead rider's bulky frame even beneath his parka. Mason Kell, a trapper who boasted in town of pelts he had no right to claim. His kind never came without rifles. Evelyn's pulse thudded. If they tracked the infants here, if they caught scent of what huddled inside her cabin, there would be no mercy. She glanced back at the hearth. The little ones stirred, restless, sensing danger in the air. Their dark eyes opened, wide and alert, and for the first time she saw not just fear but something deeper, awareness. The hunters cut their engines close, letting silence swallow the distance. Evelyn heard boots crunching through snow, men speaking low, their words carried by the wind. Prints clear as day. Too small headed this way, then Mama can't be far. Worth more than any wolf hide. Evelyn's blood ran cold. They weren't after deer or fox tonight. They were after the young. She knelt quickly by the infants. "Stay quiet," she whispered, though she knew they couldn't understand. Yet one pressed a hand against her chest as though listening to her heartbeat, and she felt the strangest certainty. They did understand, in some raw and wordless way. A heavy knock rattled the cabin door. "Evening, Mrs. Hart," Mason's voice drawled, mock polite. "Storm's nasty. You seen anything unusual out here? Tracks, maybe?" Evelyn's hand hovered over the latch. Every instinct screamed to bolt the door, to deny him, to protect what had been entrusted to her. But before she could move, the infants reacted. The elder one let out a low guttural sound, not loud but vibrating with a force that prickled her skin. The lantern flickered. The timbers groaned. Outside, Mason cursed. "You hear that?" Another voice muttered, like something growling. Snow slid from the roof in a sudden sheet, crashing down to bury the porch. The doorframe shuddered as if the storm itself had risen against intrusion. Evelyn's breath caught. Was it the wind or something more? The infants clung to her legs, but their eyes glowed with a strange intensity. Evelyn understood then. They were not helpless. Not entirely. Whatever power ran in their blood was waking, summoned by threat. Another knock, harder. "Open up, widow. Best not hide things that don't belong to you." Evelyn squared her shoulders. The years had hollowed her, yes, but they had also left her with nothing to lose. She pulled the bolt across the door, sealing it firm. "There's nothing here for you," she called, her voice steady despite the quake in her bones. Silence answered, then the crunch of boots retreating, circling, voices conferring in anger. They wouldn't give up. Not men like Mason, but neither, Evelyn realized, would she. The fire roared suddenly higher, sparks dancing as if fanned by unseen breath. The infants pressed close, their small frames trembling not just with fear but with the echo of something vast, something waiting beyond the tree line. Evelyn felt it too, a presence gathering, ancient and protective. The hunters thought they stalked prey. They had no idea what truly surrounded them. The hunters lingered outside the cabin, shadows pacing in the snow. Their voices carried sharp and mean, yet every time one edged closer to the porch, the storm thickened, blinding them in a swirl of ice. Evelyn held her breath, rocking the infants as though her heartbeat alone might shield them. Then it came, the sound she had felt building all night. A low resonant boom that was not thunder, not falling trees, but something older. 3 knocks, slow, deliberate, echoing through the valley. The pines shivered as if bowing. The hunters fell silent. Evelyn's blood froze and burned at once. The infants stirred, eyes widening. They answered with tiny knocks of their own, fists against the floorboards. The cabin trembled in sympathy. Evelyn's throat tightened. She realized they were calling family. From the woods came movement. Not footsteps, but a procession. Dark figures, tall as the pines themselves, emerged one by one, their silhouettes blurred by snow. 30, maybe more, encircling the clearing in solemn quiet. The hunters' curses broke into panic. Engines sputtered as they scrambled for their machines. Mason shouted orders, but even he sounded small beneath the weight of that gathering. Evelyn rose slowly, her arms cradling the little ones. She stepped to the window and lifted the curtain. The sight stole her breath. Massive forms stood shoulder to shoulder, fur heavy with frost, eyes glowing like embers in the storm. Not hostile, not violent, watching, waiting. The infants wriggled in her arms, urging toward the door. Evelyn hesitated. Every story of monsters battling with the truth before her. These weren't monsters. They were kin, bound not by blood but by something deeper, something sacred. She unbolted the door and stepped into the snow. The storm eased as she crossed the threshold, flakes falling soft and slow, lantern light stretching outward. The circle of giants parted, making room. One figure stepped forward. A matriarch, broad-shouldered, her chest draped with woven fibers, charms of bone and feather braided into her hair. She extended a hand the size of Evelyn's chest, palm open. Evelyn lowered the infants onto the snow. They rushed forward, clinging to the matriarch's legs. The elder lifted a hand, pressing it against her chest in mimicry of Evelyn's gesture hours earlier. The matriarch knelt, gathering them both into her arms, and for an instant her gaze met Evelyn's. Not animal, not alien, human in its depth, ancient in its knowing. Evelyn felt no fear then, only a swell of belonging, as if the hollow spaces grief had carved in her had been filled. She pressed a trembling hand to her heart and bowed her head. The matriarch reached forward, brushing Evelyn's forehead with the back of one massive finger. The touch was cool, gentle, leaving behind the faintest mark of ash. A blessing, a bond. From her chest, the matriarch drew a woven braid, strands of grass and hair twined with a single raven's feather. She placed it in Evelyn's palm, curling the woman's fingers around it. A gift unmistakable, a sign of acceptance. Around them, the clan raised their heads and released a sound that shook the earth. A chorus, mournful yet strong, rolling through the valley like a hymn. Evelyn's knees weakened beneath the weight of it. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of fear but of awe. The hunters were gone. Their engines howled retreat into the night. Only Evelyn remained, standing in snow-lit silence, braid clutched to her chest, while 30 guardians melted back into the forest, leaving her cabin ringed with peace. She had not lost a family. She had found one. Morning came slow, dragging gold across the snow. Evelyn sat on the porch steps, the woven braid resting against her chest. The storm had broken, leaving the air clear and startlingly still. For the first time in months, she heard birdsong, tentative at first, then confident, as if the forest itself was taking a deep breath. The ring of trees that once felt suffocating now seemed like guardians keeping watch. The cabin, once only wood and nails holding in her grief, now pulsed with a quiet life she hadn't noticed before. A jay darted to the railing, cocked its head, and sang boldly. Evelyn laughed. An unpracticed sound, brittle at first, then rich and warm. Her chest no longer felt hollow. The ache of Frank's absence remained, but it was softened, woven into something larger than pain. She thought of the matriarch's touch, the feather in the braid, the way the forest had embraced her instead of spitting her out. She had been living like a ghost, certain the world had forgotten her, but the truth stood undeniable. She belonged, not despite her wounds, but because of them. The snow began to loosen, dripping from the eaves in steady rhythms. Patches of earth peeked through along the tree line, brave shoots of green pushing against the frost. Evelyn leaned back in her rocker, closing her eyes. The warmth of the sun touched her face, and she let it. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and ash. The fire burned low, but she no longer needed it to chase away fear. She rose, set the braid gently on the mantel beside Frank's photo, and whispered, "We're not alone anymore." When she opened the door again, the forest greeted her with the sound of 3 distant knocks. Not urgent, not demanding, just a reminder. A heartbeat shared across trees. Evelyn pressed her palm to the porch rail, feeling the vibration hum through her bones. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was waiting for something to return. She was already home. Even after the snow melted and the shoots of spring spread through the hollow, Evelyn carried the memory of that night like a quiet ember. Grief had once been her only companion, sharp as the wind that scoured the ridge. But grief, she realized, was never meant to be a prison. It was a doorway, a threshold where memory waits to be honored, not hidden. She thought of Frank's hands, the way he used to split cedar and laugh at his own mistakes. She thought of her son's scarf still folded in the chest, the wool carrying a faint scent of pine. For years she had let those objects weigh her down like anchors. Now they felt different, lighter, as if the forest itself had taken some of the burden. Maybe belonging isn't about who stays or who leaves. Maybe it's about recognizing the threads that connect us across time. Threads of kindness, of mercy, of simple courage to open a door on a winter night. The world remembers acts like that. just as the ground remembers footsteps and rivers remember stones. The cabin stood quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt shared. Every bird call, every rustle in the trees was a reminder that presence mattered more than words. Silence was not absence. It was agreement, a kind of trust between her and the land. That evening, as the last light settled into indigo, she heard it again. 3 knocks, steady, unhurried, echoing across the pines. She didn't rise to answer. She didn't need to. The message was already inside her, stitched into every breath. She smiled, pressed her palm against the cedar rail, and let the rhythm carry through her bones. Sometimes the deepest stories aren't written in books or carved in stone. They live in gestures. The gift of a braid, the weight of a hand, the echo of 3 knocks at dusk. They remind us that we are remembered, even when we think we've been forgotten. And as Evelyn closed her eyes, the forest breathed with her. Not in warning, not in sorrow, but in recognition. She was no longer a visitor. She was part of the ground now, and the ground would remember. And that brings us to the end of Evelyn's story. An ordinary woman whose single act of kindness changed everything. A reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures open the widest doors. But what do you think? If you were in her place alone in a frozen cabin, would you have let those 2 shivering infants inside? Or would fear have made you close the door? I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feelings, and even your own encounters or family legends down in the comments below. If this story spoke to you, if it made you pause, reflect, or even feel a chill, you can help me keep bringing more tales like this by giving the video a like. It truly makes a difference. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next story. Because the next one might just be even stranger. Until then, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, sometimes the forest is listening.